morning, everyone. Generally, cases in courts reach through two methods. One is generally writ jurisdiction. Second is civil or statutory jurisdiction. Of course, there are also criminal cases, and for that, a lot of events have to happen somewhere else. So, how does a civil case proceed? It starts from filing of a plaint, where you put out your basic facts, and it is those facts which bind you till the end of the case. If you want, you can amend your pleadings, which happened in this case. There were amendments. And then, after your pleadings are finalized, you file a plaint, the other side replies, then issues are framed. You advance some issues, the other side advances some issues, and if there are multiple civil suits, then all of them are clubbed. Issues from every suit is taken. They all form the issues. After the issues are framed, evidence is adduced, and then cross-examination takes place, which is again part of evidence, and finally you come to the final arguments. Of course, this was a case which took many, many years. Issues were framed, evidence was adduced, and then the Lakshman Rekha was drawn. Every party has to stick to that. I'm saying this because you must have read many articles which talked about a lot of issues of constitutional law, of faith, of jurisprudence, without alluding to the fact as to what were the issues framed, what were the facts that the parties pleaded, and where was the Lakshman Rekha drawn. The second issue of importance is also that, were there any concessions in the case by counsels? The answer is yes. What happens if there is a concession? If I say it is day, or if I say this is night, and you also say this is night, then the judge has to say this is night. That's civil suit for you. So a lot of reasoning and other things go out of the window. You have to stick to your pleadings. That's where you have to stick. So what were the issues in the case? That's very important. Both sides filed their own suits. Hence, one side had to prove that there existed a mosque exclusively. If there is a mosque, then it's a mosque. The other side had to prove that there existed a temple, or there existed a temple once upon a time. That is what the other side had to prove. So did a mosque exclusively ever existed there? One side pleaded that yes, Babur built that mosque and he dedicated it. The question was asked, what evidence is there for you from 1528 onwards? There was a concession from the other side that we don't have any evidence. I'll give you the paramount of the judgment. You can read it later. The leading counsel for the other side said that our evidence starts only in 1856, 1857. The counsel also conceded that there is no evidence of namaz being offered at that site before 1856, 1857. Then what were you doing there till 1856, 1857? That's the first question. Because when we talk about evidence, and we are talking about a civil suit, in many civil cases there cannot be absolute evidence, like in a criminal case that you go beyond reasonable doubt. Then what do you prove? You prove on preponderance of probabilities. What is more probable? So in a case where a party itself comes and says that I don't have evidence, any documentary evidence before 1856, 1857, I have not offered namaz there before 1856, 1857, then what is the inference that you draw on preponderance of probability in a civil suit is the first question. The second question is, has the other side given you any evidence? You are asking us about so much of evidence. The answer to that is, what evidence of history can you give? In a clash between, say, Ram and Ravan, the court cannot summon Ram and Ravan to give evidence. Of course, they can't. The Vanasena also cannot be someone that you come and give evidence, neither can Kumbhakarna be someone. So there are limitations. How does the court go ahead? There is an exception to law of evidence. Here we go by hearsay evidence. That is where it is allowed. The hearsay evidence is generally not allowed. But when you go and prove historical facts, then after a certain point of time, hearsay evidence is allowed. Then you go to documents under section 37 and 81 of the Evidence Act. Certain historical facts are proved and assumed to be correct through documents. So the other side say we don't have even documents, we don't have even stories, we don't have any books, we don't have any storytellers talking about us offering namaz there. So of course the second question will be asked is, okay, do you have anything about you offering worship or prayers or there existing a temple there? The answer to that is yes. They were travelogues of travelers, they were gazetteers, and history relies on travelogues. We have all heard about Hien Sang. It is Hien Sang book which gives us a lot of history about ancient Magadh, Nalanda, the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist methods and the lives of the kings, queens and the society of that time. So history cannot play a rewind. That time those technologies were not there. And run it for you. Look, this is what history is. I'm rewinding it for you. There is human limitation to it. So history relies on certain tools. When history of Mohenjo-daro is written, you don't summon people from Mohenjo-daro. And if anyone is capable of summoning people from Mohenjo-daro, I better stay away from them. So how do we go ahead with it? We rely on all these issues. If the other side have a right to cross-examine the witness and to impugn the veracity of all these things? The answer is yes. Did they do it and were they able to successfully challenge those travelogues, gazetteers, historical documents? The answer is no. So on one side, we have evidence under section 8137 of the Indian Evidence Act. We have a concession from the other side that we never offered namaz. We don't have any documentary evidence before 1856, 1857. And yet they claim that they were in peaceful possession of this land. They were offering namaz. And they constructed the building for which they have no documents. They have no proof, no storyteller, no historical fact, no historical book. There's one great thing about being a ruler or a king. People will write stories and documents about you. Generally, it is written. So, if emperors, rulers were there, some story, some document will be there. Unless until you have been such an awful emperor that no one thought it good enough to write a story about you. Because you could not give any grants, you could not have courtiers, there was no one to butter you up, and nothing. That was not the case. They were powerful emperors, but not a single word, single story, single travelogue, single historical document, single gazetteer, nothing. This is not what we said. This is what they said, that this is ours. Neither about the construction, neither about offering prayer. While the other side gives travelogues, other side gives historical documents, other side gives gazetteers. But were these travelers biased? No. Most of them travelers were English travelers because India was had already seen East India Company coming. British travelogues, Christian missionaries, they were not concerned about the dispute on the about one side or the other. To begin with, it is later that they came upon the divide and rule policy, and in which they made sure that the both sides are penalized. They were not here to favor one side over the other. That is the second part. Third question also arises as to what all can be deities in Hindu law. Can a temple exist without an idol? And did an exclusive mosque ever existed at that place? In para 769 of the judgment, after finding and after, as Mr. Yogeshwaran said, that a court commissioner was appointed, he gave a report. The court commissioner pointed out that there is a Singh Dwar, there is Jai and Vijay over there. Hindu deities. They are Hindu motifs. There is Garuda, there is Peacock. What does this mean? And what finding did the court give? I am reading that para out to you because all the critics who have written, it seems they have not read the judgment. What was the structure there is the first question. No one has answered that. Mr. Yogeshwaran just gave you an insight into that. But none of the critics, none of the articles, none of the big debates have answered that. In one of the debates in one of the leading English channels, it was said that the court has relied on one faith and not on the other. If there is a mosque, you have to presume that there was prayer. You never took this stand in the civil suit. You never brought any evidence to that. On the contrary, Mr. Jilani, one of the lawyers for that side, I'll give you the para number, himself conceded. I'll read 3 or 4 paragraphs and just 1 or 2 lines of that to give you that. And Mr. Jilani's concession is recorded. That first formulation, the formulation of Mr. Jilani, this is page 691. The formulation of Mr. Jilani that the Ram Chabutra is the birthplace will assume significance from 2 perspectives. The first is that the entire site comprising of the inner and outer courtyard is one composite property. Now the counsel for the other side said that if this is the disputed property, then if one side is saying that this is the birthplace of Ram, this is not the birthplace of Ram, but this side is the birthplace of Ram. What does this mean? The court says this means that within this hall there is birthplace of Ram, and this is one composite unit. So where was the need for controversy? There was no need for controversy. Then in para 769, what is the formulation of and finding given by the court? After looking at the court commissioner's report, to which the other side could have raised objection and proved their case, which they could not. And secondly, the evidence of the Archaeological Survey of India. Now, civil suits pleadings can be amended. In 1992, when the disputed structure was brought down, the suit was amended. So after the ASI report came in, the suit could have been again amended. They did not amend the suit. And then, later on, without amending the suit, a plea was set up that below the land was an Eidgah. Not a word said, not a word of evidence adduced. Now, what does para 769 at page number 881 of the judgment says? It says, and I quote, "The disputed site has witnessed a medley of faith and coexistence of Hindu and Muslim practices, belief and customs. A blend of Hindu and Muslim elements emerged from the religious and architectural traditions associated with the erstwhile structure, which embodied features both of a temple and a mosque." So the question whether there was an exclusive structure of a mosque is answered in negative. It had features of both temple and a mosque, legally speaking. While the distinctive architectural elements overlapped, they were yet easily recognizable. They were symbols of a syncretic culture. Specific sculptured finds such as black Kasauti stone pillars, along with the presence of the figurines of Varaha, Garuda, Jai and Vijay, suggested that they were primarily meant for decoration of a Hindu temple facade and served as deities to be worshipped. At the same time, the distinctive appearance of a mosque emerged from the 3 domes, the wazu, the stone inscription with the Allah, the mimbar and the mihrab. The real significance attached to the composite structure is evidenced by the nature and length of use by both the parties. So it was a composite structure, below which there existed a structure similar to a temple, a non-Islamic structure. Then you have no documentary evidence from 1528 to 1857. You yourself say that there is no evidence of us offering nawaz between 1528 to 1857. And you yourself say that within this building is the birthplace of Ram. Another important feature of the civil suit is how did you describe the property? It is not that both the sides only had differences. There were similarities also in case of both the sides. And one of the similarity was identifying the disputed structure. They both said this is one composite structure, and they both identified in their pleadings that structure to be 1500 square yards. After the court had, as the main area, of course both claimed beyond that area as well. But after 1992, the dispute was restricted by the court to only 1500 square yards. So this whole controversy was only about 1500 square yards of land from 1992 onwards. The judgment, as a matter of fact, though a lot of hard work was put in, relies on 3-4 concessions. One of the concessions I read to you. Now a few more concessions has to be read because they go to the root of the matter. What were those concessions? And what were those issues? The issues at page 84, the prime issues were whether there was a dedication of the 3-dome structure as a waqf. They say that we don't have any evidence. This a particular side had to prove, who were claiming the whole area to be mosque from 1528. Where was dedication? They said we have no evidence before 1856, of course, so there is no evidence of dedication. Second issue, where there is work by public user. This is very important issue and very interesting. You lay a claim to something by use, right? If I keep using Mr. Yogeshwaran's cars every day and he never claims it as his own after some time, and I'm holding it adversely to him that no, this is not your car. After some time, this car becomes my car. That's adverse possession. That happens with land. And by using a place as a religious place, you give it conferment of that particular place. So they said it's work by user. Now, if Mr. Yogeshwaran trusts me with his car, we decide that to buy a car together and we both use it together. Sometimes carpooling sort of thing. Can Mr. Yogeshwaran gift it single-handedly to our friend on the dais? Or can I gift it single-handedly to our friend on the dais? The answer is no. If it's a composite structure, and if, by your own admission, other side is also coming, Hindus are coming and worshipping at Ram Chabutra, at Sita Rasoi, because within this structure, there was a central dome, this side was Ram Chabutra, that side could be Sita Rasoi, just giving you roughly an idea of what the case was. So there is a common structure used by both, not disputed. So can you gift it? Can I gift it? Can the Hindus gift it? Can the Muslim gift it? If it's one composite land and being used by both? No. The concept of waqf is very strict. In 1963, there was a case in which a Muslim lady said that I am making this land a waqf. And she said this will be used by everyone. The court held that though she did it for religious purpose, 5 judges bench, it cannot be waqf. Because waqf can only be if it is dedicated only for the use of poor. Only and exclusively for the use of poor or only for Allah. Fair enough. This is a very pious and very correct principle, because if rich can afford it, then why are you doing charity for them? They will come and block the way of the poor. It was held that that is not a waqf. So your exclusive user has to be there, and it has to be only for the poor. Here there is no exclusive user. Here, and also there is no dedication. So therefore, there exists no case. Another important point was whether the plaintiffs in suit 4 have established their title to disputed property. Of course, if there is no evidence, you say yourself, and you yourself say that the birth of Ram was at Ram Chabutra, which is part of the 1500 square yards, then what case does the other side have to prove? Third, whether the plaintiffs in suit 5, the Hindus, have established their claim to the title. When does the Hindus' evidence start from? It starts from the travelogues. They claim that there was a disputed structure, that there was a structure below the disputed land. Whether it was a Hindu structure or not has been found to be correct. Their claim that they cannot adduce any evidence has been found to be correct. They claim that even after 1857, after the artificial partition done by the British of a composite land, because both the sides said it's a composite land, there cannot be any division of it. The British put in a railing. And even after that, a lot of people jumped that railing, broke the British imposed law and order to jump on the other side. Many a times they performed Havan, they entered, they performed Puja. Of course, they were thrown out. But their claim was always there. For adverse possession, if you want to go and grab someone else's property, you have to declare that you are in adverse possession, it's your exclusive possession, and that you are the whole and sole owner of the property to the exclusion of others. Now, if within this property other people are also coming in, and they are fighting to get into that part of this property which you are in possession of, or which you are using, either ways, then there is no peaceful possession. So if it's not possession in peace or peaceful possession, if it's not an exclusive possession, then there is no adverse possession. So you fail to prove your case of mosque by dedication. Number one, because you yourself say there is no evidence. You fail to prove your case of work by user, because your user is not exclusive. You don't bring any storytellers, you don't bring any travelogues. You bring a document by historians whom you don't make your own witness. Who stopped you from making them your witness? 4 historians brought out a white paper or something like that. None of them are witnesses. You don't examine the Archaeological Survey of India experts. Why? Because as students of law, you must know when to ask question, whom to ask question, and whom not to ask question. Right? Like for example, before exam, what question to be asked to the teacher, and when in class, what question to be asked to the teacher, and in what tone. Right? Suddenly, teachers become the best friend before exams, or when you want attendance. Right? So similar is the fact here. You don't go and ask question to that person who will not only establish his case but give more answers, and you will get into trouble. So the best thing is don't call him. Don't cross-examine him. Don't call him as a witness. That is what was done with the Archaeological Survey of India people. Because all the archaeological work was done under video camera, under supervision of the court. It was not a mere expert evidence as such. It was an expert evidence, but under supervision of the court, where workers from both the communities were there, and parties could nominate their people who could be present at the time of excavation all throughout. It's not that it was like you say, send DNA samples, the DNA sample comes. You don't understand the process, you just believe that a DNA sample has come, the result has come. No. You were part of the whole process of excavation. You don't cross-question them. There is no cross-examination. You don't call them as a witness. So then what can be the judgment be? And where was the controversy? If you yourself say you don't have evidence of namaz, of dedication, your user has not been exclusive, you yourself say that this property is a composite unit, you yourself say that within this unit is the birthplace of Ram, then why were you claiming it? Is one of the questions, important questions. But then some lawyers had to get work, there was a case, and there was a judgment. Thank you.